Okay, so I'll just begin then. First of all, if you got the actual paper, I have to apologize for the multiple typos, anyway, I think it'll work out. So, what should a natural law theory say about what is the good life, or and how should that goal or overall end be related to Christian, Jewish, or Islamic belief in the afterlife? By a natural law theory, I mean the view that what is morally right is in some way based on objective human flourishing. To make headway on this question, I need to make it more precise, or these questions, I should say. According to the natural law theory begun by Thomas Aquinas and developed in various ways after him, the first principles of the natural law prescribe pursuit of and respect for several specific intrinsic goods of human persons. Such goods as human life and health, speculative knowledge, harmony with other people, and so on. But that same tradition, here stretching back to Plato and then clearly articulated both by Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas, says that we ought to organize our life around a single unified goal. Aristotle refers to this as eudaimonia, the good life, and Aquinas refers to it as beatitude. Both terms, of course, have frequently been translated as happiness. How should pursuit of these several intrinsic goods, or the specific goods, be related to the ultimate end, the overarching goal of human life? And in turn, how should the overarching end be related to life after death, given that there is a life after death? To address these questions, I will first review some key points about the specific intrinsic human goods. I will argue that these intrinsic goods, such as life and health, knowledge, friendship, and so on, are worthwhile in themselves. That is, they are in the strict sense ultimate ends, and that they are incommensurably good. These 2 points heighten the problem I am addressing. For if these basic goods are each intrinsically and incommensurably good, then there appear to be several ultimate ends, and these goods seem to have a significance even apart from their connection to eternal life. How then can the moral life have a genuine unity if the measure of the moral life here is provided by these proximate goods? In the second part of the paper, I will argue against an Aristotelian attempt to provide unity to the moral life that invokes an objective hierarchy of intrinsic excellence among the specific intrinsic goods. And in the third part, I will comment on how these goods, or in general, life in this world, is related to eternal life. In that section, I will draw on ideas set out by I will first try to say something about it, what we can say philosophically, and then draw on some ideas set out by the Catholic Church in Vatican Council II, and more recently expressed and developed by Germain Grisez. So I will focus first on the unity issue, that is, on whether the intrinsic basic human goods are related to an overall unified end. In his treatment of the principles of the natural law in the Summa Theologiae, the first part of the second part, question 94, article 2, Aquinas famously says that practical reason naturally apprehends that there are several intrinsic goods, activities or conditions that are in themselves and not mere means to ulterior ends, that are good in themselves, but not mere means. He argues that practical reason grasps as good and worthy of pursuit the various objects of our natural inclinations, that is, objects of our basic potentialities, such goods as life, marriage, friendship, living in society, and so on. Later athetians, of course, have added to this list, citing also play and skillful performance, aesthetic experience, self-integration, and which, of course, Aquinas notes in other places, religion, understood as harmony with God in the sense of a natural good. They provide ultimate reasons for action and constitute in some way a standard for how we ought to choose. Though of course later natural law thinkers have interpreted or developed Aquinas in various ways on how that standard should be understood. My position is that along the lines of that developed by Grisez, Boyle, and Finnis, that the basic moral criterion is that we ought to choose in line with a respect for and openness to all these intrinsic goods, both in ourselves and in others. But the question here is how pursuit of these various specific goods can be related to or a more unified or organized and overarching end? How is respect and promotion of these basic goods to be, and secondly, how is respect and promotion of these intrinsic specific goods related to the next life or eternal life? On the issue of the unity of the overarching end, one suggestion might be that Aristotle has already provided us a solution, where he argues that reason or nous is superior, and so the life of contemplation is the ideal life. And so our life should have a hierarchical structure or unity corresponding to the priority of reason. In other words, or in the sense of reason, in the sense of contemplation of truth. In other words, one might argue that Aristotle had it right when he said that contemplation is the highest intrinsic good, and so the intrinsic basic goods are not so disparate as they first appear. Rather, there is a hierarchy of an intrinsic hierarchy of basic goods, and so there is a unity inscribed within human nature itself. On this view, the basic goods, such as life, knowledge, friendship, and so on, are only proximate goods. They are not actually ultimate ends. On this view, the structure of human nature provides a kind of pattern that requires giving priority to some goods over others, and thus provides a unity beyond the disparate basic goods. This argument could be put in a more challenging way. Do not both Aristotle and St. Thomas show, it might be argued, that there is only one ultimate end, even on the natural level? Have they not shown that the perfection of a nature must consist in the actualization of its highest power, that of the power that distinguishes it from other natures? This suggestion has two parts. First, it is argued that the human being's natural ultimate end must be singular or unified, and so there's not really several ultimate ends. Second, that the actualization of some human capacities is in itself higher or more excellent than the actualization of other powers. The first point on the unity of human nature and the unity of the ultimate end seems to be held by St. Thomas when he argues in question 1, Article 5 in the Prima Secundae, quote, it is impossible for the human being's will to be directed at the same time to diverse things as last ends. First, because since everything desires its own perfection, someone desires for his ultimate end that which he desires as his perfect, completely fulfilling good. It is therefore necessary for the last end so to fill someone's appetite that nothing is left besides it for him to desire. But that is not possible if something else be required for his perfection. Consequently, it is not possible for the appetite, the will, to tend to two things as though each were its perfect good. So one might ask, am I denying the unity of human nature? Am I denying that each being does seek its perfection? In reply, an end can be ultimate without being complete. And I think there are several ultimate ends, including life and health, knowledge, friendship, and so on. Suppose that while walking across a bridge, one sees a child drowning in the river below. It is perfectly possible for one to understand that it would be a good thing to save that drowning person. And it seems possible for one to understand this without adverting to how this action might fit within one's larger conception of an ideal life, an end viewed as in some sense complete. One could see that this child's life is worth preserving and that despite the dangers involved, it would be a good thing to jump in to save him. The preservation of this child's life could be rightly understood as good in itself. And this means that this child's life is sufficient to motivate one to choose to try to save him. And so human life is in itself good, that is, worthwhile in itself, and not only as a means towards some other good. And something similar, I think, is true of knowledge, aesthetic experience, and of each of the basic intrinsic goods. So I think each of the several intrinsic goods is an ultimate end, although not a complete end. None of them provides complete fulfillment. Now, I do think that one should have a larger life planned, and it's also worth noting that a life plan can operate habitually, that is, have an influence on what one chooses without one explicitly adverting to it. But I still think one can make a choice without such a plan being active in one's choice. It is true that each choice must have an ultimate end. Aristotle and Aquinas are, of course, correct that an infinite regress of final causes of one's choice is impossible. But I don't see that that ultimate end must be conceived of as complete. There are many ultimate ends in the sense of goods that are sufficient to be ultimate reasons for acting, goods that do not derive their intelligible desirability or rational desirability from their relation to some further good. Second, both Aristotle and Aquinas view the end, that is both ultimate and complete, the ideal life, eudaimonia or beatitudo perfecta, as in fact a conjunction of several goods. For example, Aquinas, in considering objections to his position that there is only one ultimate end, raises the following objection. What is ordained to the ultimate end is useful. The objection runs that what is ordained to the ultimate end is useful. What is ordained to the ultimate end is useful and therefore play and therefore serious. But play, by definition, is done for its own sake. Aquinas' reply, in other words, the objection is that it seems that play is pursued for its own sake and so is in some sense an ultimate end. Aquinas' reply is that while the good of play does not have an extrinsic end, it is ordered to the good of the player, and the consummate good of the human being is the ultimate end. He makes a similar point about speculative knowledge. It is desired as a certain good of the one knowing, which is comprehended under the complete and ultimate good, which is the ultimate end. So the end that is both ultimate and complete is conceived and can be conceived and is by St. Thomas himself conceived as a conjunction that includes other goods, not as mere means in relation to it, but as intrinsically good constituents of that more complete condition. Aquinas does seem to hold that in every deliberate choice that we make, there must be an end that is conceived of as both ultimate and complete. And I am not convinced that he is right about that. Still, this latter position is consistent with the claim that I am making now, namely that there are several goods that are intrinsically worthwhile. And that seems to be precisely what is asserted in Aquinas' discussion of the first principles of the natural law, namely that we apprehend that each of these goods, life, knowledge, and so forth, is in itself good, not merely a means. And I think he is right on that point. The second part of the objection raised just a few moments ago is, of course, Aristotle's function argument. According to this argument, reason is the highest part of the human being, and so the actualization of the intellect in relation to its highest objects is superior to and more excellent than any of the other goods, such as life and health, play, or skillful performance, and so on. The highest real perfection of the human being, the objection goes, must have some kind of priority in relation to the other goods, and so provide a unity beyond the several intrinsic basic goods. Aristotle's argument on eudaimonia seems to back this objection, of course. There he says in book 10, chapter 7 in the Nicomachean Ethics, that which is proper to each thing is by nature best and most pleasant for each thing. For the human being, therefore, the life according to intellect is best and most pleasant. Since intellect, more than anything else, is the human being, this life, therefore, is also the highest. The question, however, is whether two types of intrinsic basic goods, say speculative knowledge on the one hand and health on the other, can be compared with each other so that one is inherently more excellent than the other. And I believe that the answer is that it cannot. And so this proposal, that is the function argument itself, I believe is mistaken. First, also, it does not seem true that that which is specific to a natural kind is necessarily the highest part of things of that kind. One might think that since a human being is a rational animal and a human being is a more excellent thing than other animals, it follows that a human being's animality is less excellent than her rationality. But a specific difference is not a distinct part of a thing. Rather, it is that specific conceptual aspect of a thing that we, as abstract knowers, come to know last when we understand what something is. It is only logically distinct in our abstract concepts, not distinct in reality prior to our conceptualizations. In the real order, the specific difference is not separate itself or not a separate half or part. Specific difference characterizes the whole thing. So it is not as if in a human being, some of the intrinsic goods are just animal or material, as if the health of a human being, for example, were purely animal, while the intellectual capacities and acts were added to the human's animality and thus made the human being more excellent than the others within that genus. Rather, the life and health of a human being is the life and health of a person. And in the real order, this life includes all of the capacities, at least at the root or radical level, that distinguish a human being from other types of animal. True, there are spiritual acts and there are material attributes such as size and shape, but the intrinsic goods, the intrinsic goods that one might classify as material, such as health and skillful performance, and the basic spiritual goods, such as understanding and practical reasonableness, each have both spiritual and material aspects. For example, understanding is fueled or fed by imagination and other bodily cognitive acts. The basic goods are distinct and good in themselves. Since we apprehend that each is good in itself and not derivatively good, it follows that what makes one good worthwhile is not a relation or an efficiency, which could be a relation to some ulterior good, which could make it more proximate or remote from that further good. Also, since they are distinct and irreducible to one another, each good offers or is something uniquely worthwhile, an excellence not offered by any of the other goods. So what makes each good good is not a possession of some degree of some common property that one good could possess in a higher degree than another. Otherwise, that common property would be the one intrinsic, would be the actual one intrinsic good. There is then no common feature, no covering value by which the various basic goods can be measured in relation to one another. And so it is not the case that any of these goods offers all of the goodness, which is actually an analogical concept. It is not the case that any one of these goods offers that any of these goods offers all of the goodness offered by another plus more. Each has its own distinct fullness or excellence. Hence, none of these goods is in itself more excellent with respect to rational desirability. Each is incommensurably good. Of course, this does not mean that all of us should devote equal time or need to devote equal time to pursuit of all of the basic goods. Because of our different circumstances, talents, and interests, we should specialize in different goods in different proportions or emphases. It does mean, however, that a life in which one's dominant pursuit is in the category of health or skillful performance, for example, is not just as such inferior to a life predominantly dedicated to contemplative truth. Also, the basic goods are incommensurable only with respect to goodness or desirability as such. There are many other ways in which the basic goods are commensurable. Some basic goods are more organizational, that is, organize more levels of choice for the pursuit of other goods, and thus properly have a more architectonic role in one's life than other goods. For example, if one is married, the pursuit of that good will properly organize more of one's life than many of the other basic goods. Moreover, and this is the next point a point that I will come back to in the rest of this paper, the basic good of religion, considered even its dimension as a natural good, should have a central and prior organizational role. The basic good of religion, by its nature, involves regulating the pursuit of the other goods. Still, I believe that none of these types of goods is just as such more excellent in itself than any of the others. The human good of religion is distinct from divine grace, which I think is higher, the mysterious personal presence of God in himself in a rational creature. But I'm speaking here of the natural good of religion, which I think can be specified by pursuit of things that have supernatural dimensions to them. Moreover, and this is how one's life as a whole turns out and how a particular action fits within one's life are of course important issues. I believe that one should have a view as to how the intrinsic goods one now pursues will fit within one's life as a whole, but one might not consult that end in every choice. And it remains that there are several ultimate goods in the strict sense of the term. In the strict sense, then, each of the basic human goods is an ultimate end, but of course, sometimes the term ultimate end is reserved for the state of affairs that not only can be pursued for its own sake, but is always pursued for its own sake, as Aristotle indicates in Nicomachean Ethics, Book 1, Chapter 7. There, Aristotle contrasts those things which, quote, are desirable both in themselves and for the sake of another thing with the chief good, which he says, quote, never desirable for the sake of something else, unquote, and is more complete than those other things that are both desirable for their own sake and for the sake of something else. He has in mind eudaimonia, and he seems to view it as a composite state of affairs. Strictly speaking, this condition would be an end that is both ultimate and complete, or at least as complete as one believes one can hope for. It seems to be a composite state of affairs that includes several activities that are good in themselves. He mentions virtues, friendship, and health as examples, while ranking contemplation of truth as higher than the other intrinsic goods. Aquinas also holds that some activities are in themselves good, but are also constituents in a larger condition. Still, one might wonder whether we actually should have such a larger life plan, one that unifies our whole lives and the pursuit of various goods. It is not self-evident that we need or should have one. Someone could hold that there are several activities or conditions that are worthwhile in themselves and that different people may simply organize their lives in radically different ways. However, from a theistic standpoint, there is or should be a unifying end. And here I am relying to a great extent on or borrowing much from Germain Grisez, Joseph Boyle, and John Finnis. They have argued that the natural ultimate end of human action should be cooperation with God or the good of religion, not as a specific restricted good, but as an organizational principle, coordinating one's pursuit of other goods. Given that the world, or in other words, if the theistic position is true, given that if the world is created by a perfect and provident God, then we ought to strive to be in harmony with God. And this can unify our life as a whole. The common goal will allow for rich diversity within that unity. It will allow for different ways of cooperating with God and different emphases and specializations regarding exactly how to cooperate with God's plan. The overarching natural end or goal of human life then, given that there is a perfect and provident God, is or should be the good of religion, that is harmony with the Creator or cooperation with God for the fulfillment of his plan. I believe this this position articulated in various places by Grisez, Boyle, and Finnis is correct, and that it helps to solve the problems I raised in the introduction. This end or goal, cooperation with God's plan, is distinct from, though of course not unrelated to, the beatific vision, which is in one way more specific than cooperation with God or the good of religion. The beatific vision, of course, is also a supernatural condition, not a natural good. I think this position helps to show, I hope this position, namely that the ultimate natural end is cooperation with God, helps to show how there can be an overarching unifying end or goal of our whole lives, while at the same time, there are several intrinsic goods. That is, this position can explain how there can be an overarching end without reducing the several basic goods to mere means in relationship to an ulterior condition extrinsic to them. It also can help to show how this life can be intrinsically related to the next life, to the eternal life, without reducing this life to a mere means. I think it is clear that if there is an overarching end or goal of human life, it cannot be one of the other basic human goods, but one of the basic goods besides religion. A list of the intrinsic basic goods would include the following: speculative knowledge, aesthetic experience, play or skillful performance, life and health, harmony with other people, internal harmony or self-integration, marriage, and religion. Maybe there are others, but these would be a pretty good list. The first four basic goods, namely speculative knowledge, aesthetic experience, play or skillful performance, and life and health, can be called substantive. Each of these goods is a first level good in the sense that it can be pursued apart from pursuing other goods and does not include choice in what it is. We should not identify the overarching goal of life with any of these substantive goods. Were a substantive good selected as the overarching end, as Aristotle seemed to have done with the knowledge with contemplation of truth in Book 10 of his Nicomachean Ethics, then the other basic goods would be relegated to a second-class status. Also, lives not chiefly organized around that substantive good would be inherently inferior. The other basic goods, friendship and community, self-integration, marriage, and religion, can be called reflexive. That is, in the sense that each of these consists in a harmony among persons or among aspects of a person, a harmony constituted by choosing in certain ways. These reflexive goods are second order goods. That doesn't mean second in the sense of less excellent, but second order in the sense that they are ways of pursuing or relating to various substantive goods. The reflexive goods of friendship and self-integration are orders or relationships that concern goods, but neither of them is involved or at stake in every choice that we make. That is, many of our choices inevitably do not directly bear on friendship or on self-integration. The good of marriage is not directly at stake in every choice made by a married person either, and many persons are not married or morally required to seek marriage. However, given that there is a creator and that the creator is perfect and provident, which of course are important components in the theistic worldview, the natural good of religion is at stake in every choice that we make. The natural good of religion morally requires that we seek harmony with the creator. But if God is perfect and provident, then God will have a plan for creation. And that plan will involve a community of created persons with God. So respecting the good of religion will be acting for or involve acting for the sake of and with respect for the community God has planned, whatever the specifics of that community might turn out to be. Now, when one acts as a member of a community, one acts for benefits that are both intrinsically good and at the same time fit within a larger or more inclusive reality, including the fulfillment of all the members of that community. As a member of a family, for example, one acts for the sake of the health that is in oneself, for the health in every member of the community, of the family, and at the same time for the well-being of the family as a community. The well-being of the family includes both the harmonious relationship of the members. The well-being of the family includes both the harmonious relationship of the members to one another and the fulfillment of each of those members. Hence, an upright family member orders her actions in relation to the good of the family without reducing the individual good of each family member to a mere means in relation to the good of the whole. Though the fulfillment of a community can be overarching and can be an overarching and unifying good without reducing the constituent goods of the members of that community to mere means. So unlike the other basic goods, natural religion is not the kind, it's not the kind of good that will reduce the other goods to the status of their means if it is viewed as an ultimate, an overarching end. This is a key point, since each of the basic goods truly is in itself and is irreducibly worthwhile. The argument here is still on the level of natural reasoning. I'm not borrowing at this point any teaching from the Bible or the church. In a few moments, I'll make a comparison of some of the points made here to some points made by the church in the Catholic Church and the Vatican Council II. At this point, though, from a philosophical standpoint, I presuppose some admittedly controverted points. I suppose at this point that one can know by reason that there is a first cause of the universe, that this first cause is perfect because not dependent on any other being, and that this cause, God, is provident. That is, God causes and sustains in existence every other being, every contingent being, and orders creatures or coordinates creatures toward the fulfillment of that plan. I also suppose that God creates not in order to fulfill himself, since he is already perfect in himself, and that he creates freely and intelligently, which can be argued for on the basis of the previous points. It follows, from the standpoint of reason, that we owe God gratitude for the several good things that we have, and that God has a plan for the universe with which we may cooperate. Given these points, it follows that harmony with the Creator, the good of religion, is a natural good, an important aspect of the natural flourishing of rational creatures. Gratitude to God and cooperation with him, components in the natural good of religion, are aspects of human flourishing. So, since there is a God who is perfect and provident, and the fulfillment of God's plan is worth pursuing, and this plan includes all the other intrinsic goods as constituent in that plan, it follows not only that we can pursue the fulfillment of God's plan as the overarching end or goal of one's life, but that we ought to do so. This point is not a radical departure from St. Thomas Aquinas' basic position, in that the idea that the overarching goal of this life is a communal one is made by him in several contexts. Although Aquinas is often interpreted as viewing the ultimate end of a human person individualistically, or sometimes he is read in a way that makes that implication without maybe being explicitly set out that way. He indicates otherwise that it's not the goal is not individualistic in his treatise on the natural law, and in his discussions of the basic love commandments. Aquinas argues that Aquinas argues that a law is by definition a directive from the ruler or rulers of a community, coordinating the actions of the members of the community to that community's common good or common purpose. Civil law is grounded in natural law. Natural law, in turn, is grounded in eternal law. The universe is the largest community of all. God is its ruler. Since God creates intelligently rather than by necessity of nature, God has a plan for creation. Hence, God orders the various creatures to their ends and does so by giving them their natures, which direct them to specific contributions to the fulfillment of their plan, of God's plan. That plan, as it exists within the divine mind, is the eternal law, set of directives of the actions of the creatures to the universe's common good. In the case of rational creatures, the imprint or communication of this plan for them is not in their natures alone, but in their reason, but also in their reason cooperating with their natures. The naturally known basic ethical principles constitute the natural law. Because God is the author of their nature and of their reason, these principles, because God is the author of human nature and of human reason, these basic principles are of certain sharing in eternal law. They are directives from God for rational creatures toward their contribution to the fulfillment of God's plan. Because God is already perfect, no need and in not need of creatures, he creates not in order to obtain some good for himself, as if God were using created persons. Rather, God creates to share his goodness with created persons. And the basic moral principles direct persons' actions to their own as well as others' real fulfillment. Hence, the fulfillment of rational creatures is not a means to an extrinsic end. Rather, the fulfillment or flourishing of rational creatures are constituents in the fulfillment of God's plan. Moreover, their flourishing includes being members of a community. Hence, the genuine fulfillment of all persons who voluntarily cooperate with God and other members of that community is part of the ultimate end, even on the natural level of every rational creature. Thus, morally good acts are ordered toward a common good or a communal good. The common good of the universe includes as ingredients the intrinsic goods of created persons and created persons themselves. Following moral directives, therefore, is on the deepest level a way of cooperating with God, while immoral actions depart from God's wisdom and substitute one's subjective preferences for God's coordinating wisdom. Thus, the overarching goal of a person's life, the good life, is that person's cooperation with and contribution to the fulfillment of God's plan. Aquinas also indicates that the ultimate end is communal when he identifies the first moral principle with the basic commandment to love God and love one's neighbor as oneself. He holds that the 10 Commandments are specific moral norms based on the natural law, or are expressions of the natural law, and that the basic love command is the natural law's first and most general principle. Quoting St. Thomas, quote, "Those two principles, namely, thou shalt love the Lord thy God, and thou shalt love thy neighbor, are the first general principles of the natural law, and are self-evident to human reason, either through nature or through faith," unquote. To love someone is to will good to that person. So to love God is to will good to God, and to love one's neighbor is to will his or her genuine good to that person. Hence, to love God means first to rejoice in his goodness, since he is already good, the goodness he himself is, and second, to will and thus work for the fulfillment of his plan. We cannot discover by natural reason the specifics of that plan. Still, it evidently includes a community of creatures in some way sharing in goods with God and with one another. Hence, the good of fulfillment of fellow rational creatures and of oneself is not in logical tension. It is often in practical tension. It is not in logical tension with or an alternative to God's plan. Love of God logically entails love of neighbor and of self, just as loving one's next door neighbor, say, entails loving his children or all those whom he loves. Also, the genuine good of one's neighbor and of oneself is comprised in the intrinsic basic goods. So to love God and love one's neighbor as oneself is the same as to act in line with the love and respect for the intrinsic basic goods, both of oneself and overall to work for the fulfillment of God's plan. The relation between the specific principles of the natural law, the directives to the several specific goods on the one hand, and the unified overarching natural ultimate end on the other hand can be explained as follows. The basic principles of the natural law are the practical precepts directing us to pursue and promote the various basic intrinsic goods or the aspects of human flourishing. I think the first moral principle, the most basic moral principle of the natural law, can be expressed as follows. We ought to choose in line with a love and respect for every aspect of the intrinsic good of persons, both in ourselves and in others. If what I have set out so far here is correct, the overarching end or goal of the moral life can be expressed as follows. One ought to work for and cooperate with the fulfillment of God's plan for creation, whatever that plan is. Or one ought to seek to contribute to the fulfillment of God's plan. The specific natural law precepts, on the one hand, and the overarching end, on the other hand, referring to cooperation with God, are related as part to whole or as content to form. I think this position is compatible with and open to being supplemented and specified by a belief of faith in the eternal life, along the lines of Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. We can see this if we compare this position with the position of Aristotle on the good life. In Aristotle's ethics, the overarching aim is purely this worldly, and the notions of providence, natural religion, friendship with God, or cooperation with God through no fault of his own are absent. In Aristotle's view, the good life is a richly fulfilled life in this world. For this reason, Aristotle does not hesitate to say that the possibility of a good life, of eudaimonia, is contingent on good fortune, on having some degree of wealth, natural intelligence, good parents, and even moderately good looks. Without a moderate degree of these, one cannot be eudaimon. This is Nicomachean Ethics, the book 1, chapter 8. Now, it is hard to imagine, at least this is my view on this, it's hard to imagine that given this, that St. Paul or St. Teresa of Calcutta, or even Jesus himself would qualify as having eudaimon in Aristotle's sense. Did they lead a good life? I think from the purely Aristotelian standpoint, at least in the book, unless he's modified radically, I think the answer would be no, they didn't really lead a good life. They didn't have a good life. But since on the view I have argued here, namely that the overarching end is cooperation with God's plan, a person's life can be truly, given that that is true, if that is true, then a person's life can be truly a good life, everything it is meant to be, even with bad fortune, low intelligence, and lack of conventional physical beauty. One could say this even on the basis of philosophical or natural law principles. Whereas I think the addition of belief in the eternal life would have to reverse or deny important elements of Aristotle's position. If the overarching end is cooperation with God, then one can accept on faith, without denying the philosophical conclusions about moral principles or the ultimate end, that the overarching goal of our life should not be to build a richly fulfilled life here. Rather, it should be to cooperate with God in the fulfillment of his plan, whatever that plan is. From the standpoint of faith, speaking now from the standpoint of Christian faith, one can say that while the good life here includes a respect for all of the intrinsic goods in oneself and in others, one should not be focused solely on this life. Whereas Aristotle's position is at the very least in a sharp tension with the otherworldliness of Christianity, of Christian, Jewish, and Muslim faith, the ultimate natural end that I have set out before, relying on many others, is consistent with that emphasis on eternal life. For example, St. Paul says quite bluntly in his letter to the Colossians, quote, "Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth, for you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God." Does this mean that the ultimate end, once one adds Christian, Jewish, or Muslim faith by a specification, that the ultimate end is only a future condition? No, the various ways of participating in and choosing in line with love of intrinsic goods of persons, and the act of cooperation with fulfillment of God's plan, even specified by Christian, Jewish, or Muslim teaching, those participation in those goods and those good choices begin even in this life. The community of God and his friends begins in this life, but extends into the next life. Hence, our contributions in this life to the fulfillment of God's plans, what that plan is remaining unspecified philosophically, but revealed only by the teaching of faith, are not mere means in relation to a future end state, but are constituents in that complete fulfillment. For that fulfillment, completed only in the next life, will include those contributions. It also is worth noting that the sufferings or tribulations of persons in this life can, consistent with the natural law of use set out here, have a positive point, not just as means to a future condition, but as facets of our characters, which are of course, important parts of the community that begins here and continues in eternal life. The sufferings of St. Paul, St. Teresa, and Jesus partly define who they are, partly constitute their characters. Those characters and the various intrinsic goods of persons are partly formed in enduring and responding to the sufferings and tribulations in this life. In sum, the natural overarching end of the human person is cooperation with God and his friends, which involves in some way the formation of a community of divine and created persons sharing in various goods, including the intrinsic goods of persons. And so this overarching and unifying end is not something separate from, but includes participation by human persons in the various intrinsic goods. Christian, Jewish, or Islamic faith adds to the picture, or specifies the picture of what God's plan is, and also adds further, or at least Christian teaching adds further indications of how the choices and the goods in this world can be constituents in parts of the eternal life. From the standpoint of natural reason, the specifics of this plan remain unknown, but allow me now to relate these points to certain points in Christian teaching. Christian faith adds much to the picture of what God's plan is. Christian teaching is that this plan involves both creation and redemption, and that the plan is the formation of a community centered on Jesus Christ, and that Jesus Christ is both God and man, and that the community is a community richly sharing both in divine gifts, divine life itself, a supernatural gift, and created or natural goods. Jesus teaches that this community, which he calls the kingdom, is the ultimate end of Christian life. Quote, "Therefore do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be yours," unquote. St. Paul teaches that the fulfillment of God's plan is the union of all things, including angelic and human persons and lower creation, in Jesus Christ. Quote, "For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven," unquote. The Second Vatican Council, in its Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes, teaches that there is another way in which the goods in this world are connected to eternal life. At one point, the Council replies to a standard criticism of religion and of Christian teaching, in particular, that religion denies the importance of activities and goods in this world because it locates ultimate fulfillment only in the next world. And so the criticism goes, religion is antithetical to real fulfillment in this world. The Council replies that although some religious thinkers have claimed that what is good in this world is merely instrumental in relation to the next world, in truth, the completion of God's kingdom will include both natural and temporal goods begun in this world, and spiritual and supernatural goods. The completed kingdom, the Council teaches, does not consist in a specific spiritual reality alone, or in something that will occur only in the future. Completed kingdom will include a supernatural and spiritual communion in divine life, but it will also include the natural fulfillment of rational creatures, including material realities. Hence, the kingdom is not an extrinsic end in relation to which material and or this worldly goods are merely instrumental. Also, in the completed kingdom, God will recreate the fruits of our cooperation with him. This is the teaching of Vatican Council II, and make them present again in the completed and eternal kingdom. Quote, "For after we have obeyed the Lord and in his spirit nurtured on earth the values of human dignity and brotherhood and freedom, and indeed all the good fruits of our nature and enterprise, we will find them again, freed of stain, burnished, and transfigured, when Christ hands over to the Father a kingdom eternal and universal, a kingdom of truth and life, of holiness and grace, of justice, love, and peace, unquote. Thus, the council's teaching is, drawing on various teachings in the New Testament, of course, is that the kingdom is not an alternative to human fulfillment, but includes both supernatural communion with God and human natural fulfillment. This world will pass away, and our home is not here, but the goods in this world and the characters we form by our responses to these goods will be present again in the next life. So the goods in this life are connected or internally related to eternal life in two ways. Number one, the goods that begin in this life have a part-whole relation to the community that is the eternal kingdom. They will be constituents in that community. And two, we cooperate in this life and help to provide the materials for the eternal kingdom completed in the next life. We should set our minds on the eternal kingdom, and our hope is in the name of the Lord. Our hope is for eternal life, but our actions and the goods in this world are of intrinsic and eternal significance, and indeed will be present again in the eternal kingdom. So on the one hand, I think the natural and we can say from a natural law, so from that standpoint, a natural reason that the overarching natural end should be cooperation with God. And I think that also helps to or shed light on and open to the further specifications on how this world is related to the next world. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat, did you want to go into Q&A right now, or should it be a good idea to take like a 5-minute, 10-minute break?
Maybe take a few minutes. And the other question was, David had said something about at some point we should imbibe in some kind of liquids together. I don't know if you guys are going to pass that out. No, I have something up. I was wondering when that would be. When should I make my drink?
That would be after the official ending time.
Okay, yeah, we'll first have a little bit of grilling first, and then okay, so maybe a couple of minutes first. Okay.
Unless you think it'll help the Q&A.
It could oil it, yeah, whatever, yeah.
So we've got Steve Kirchner first, and then James, and then anybody else, or Jim. Anybody else, feel free to use the raise hand feature or throw like either the question or that you have a question into the chat, and I'll grab it there. So let's go back to Pat. We're gonna have Steve.
Okay, Pat, so thank you for the talk. I appreciate it. So I have a concern as to whether or not your theory has a Euthyphro problem, and here's my concern. Does God's plan make the other things worthy of pursuit, whether they're complete or ultimate goals, that doesn't matter to me? Or does God's plan merely summarize or act independently from those other goals? That is God's plan what makes the other goals worthwhile, or does it merely summarize independently the valuable goals?
I don't think it's not God's arbitrary will. I think when God, it's hard. I mean, it's the source of the goodness of all these things is God's wisdom. So but it's not a divine command theory in the sense that it's not a divine command theory. I think what makes these things worthwhile is that they're really fulfilling. What makes say a choice contrary to health morally defective is its relationship to that intrinsic good. You don't have to say that the say that the goodness or the badness of the choice relates primarily to its or consists in its relation to the divine will. Now, I think the relation to the divine will is a supplementary thing. So yeah, I think there's a way around the euthyphro problem there.
If I could follow up, I definitely do
Yeah.
not think there's a way out of, again, no offense, but
Sure.
I think that the euthyphro problem is fatal to your theory, and here's why.
Yeah.
Either you think it summarizes those goals or it doesn't. That is God's goal what the intrinsic goal maker for the other ones are not? Because if it's not, then we could do without God's plan altogether, right? It does no more than summarize, at least in part or in whole, all these other independently valuable things. If in fact, and you repeatedly in your paper, at least 3 points that I can point to, you seem to suggest the goals are worth pursuing on the basis of God's plan, then you very much have a divine command theory, because it's God's plan that makes them worth pursuing. So again, no offense,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to offend you,
Well,
but I think this is a fatal problem. I want to know whether God's plan makes these other plans worth pursuing, or whether it merely summarizes independently worthwhile goals that are independently worth pursuing.
It does. It's in terms of. I mean, I think there wouldn't be any. I mean, there wouldn't be us. There wouldn't be anything else if there wasn't a God. So in that sense, I mean, it's hard to talk about that sense. But in terms of knowledge, I think that I can know that it's worthwhile to pursue life and health and friendship and knowledge and so forth without knowing that there is a God. And if I make a choice contrary to, say, life or health, there's a defect in that choice, and that defect does not consist only in the relationship of that choice to God's will. It also consists, or even primarily consists, in the defective relationship of that choice to that good. Now, in addition, though, it will also be the fact, it will also be true that there's an additional reason for pursuing those goods. And that is because it's God's plan and it's part of the whole community. It's sort of like in a family. Let's say you have little kids in a family, and you tell them, look, you need to eat your vegetables. You need to eat healthily. Well, they have a reason to eat. They have two now. Once you tell them that, they now have two reasons to eat healthily. First of all, eating healthy is really good for them, and already. And then when you tell them that it's good, when you command them to do that, then they have an additional reason to eat their vegetables. So they have two reasons. So similarly, I think we have one reason is to pursue life and health and friendship and so on, because those are really good and worth pursuing, but also because doing so is a way of fulfilling God's plan. So I think I mean, he's not merely summarizing it in the sense because he created the whole thing, but in the sense that it's not his arbitrary will that makes it the case that pursuing life is a good thing and choosing against life is not a good thing. Does that I don't know. That
Well,
would be the
that's
direction which I
I'll
would
stop.
go.
I don't want to monopolize, but real quick, look, I want to know about God's plan. I gather you have the two reason theory, but does God's plan have an independent intrinsic goal making value to it? Because if it does, I'm not seeing how it's anything but arbitrary. And if it does not, I'm not seeing how it's superfluous. Independent of whether the other goals have value, I want to know whether God's plan is a separate value maker. And if it is, I don't see what backs it up, because any reason that seems available would seem to be parasitic on the other things. Okay, I'll stop.
Yeah, I mean, if I didn't think there was a God, I would still think, okay, well, pursuing life and health and friendship is still, good things. But now I have an additional reason to do that, because now doing so is cooperating with God, and so that's an additional reason it's not. Once we know that there is a God and that He has a plan, and that pursuing these good things is part of that plan, and so it's a way of cooperating with God. Then it does add something to it. There's an additional reason, I think. Now, that's from my standpoint. From God's standpoint, God creates not in order to fulfill Himself, but to communicate, or just out of generosity. And so He's willing a share or kind of imitation in His goodness to ourselves. So that's sort of the basis for that. I guess this, you look at this from God's point of view or our point of view, and from our point of view, you've got two reasons there for doing these things, and it organizes that. And I think that makes a difference on how we view this life, or life in this, the sort of the temporal order, and what we're going to count as a good life. Anyway, that would be the direction in which I would go with that, Steve. Thanks.
Next, we have Jim.
Thanks very much for the talk, Pat. Always nice to hear from you. So I've kind of two questions, but if we don't get to the second one, that's okay. They're only sort of related. So I definitely, like in the natural law tradition, you don't want a hierarchy among the goods, but I wonder, do you think that there's a hierarchy like within goods? So like maybe knowledge is the best example, something like that. So I'm thinking of like the Rawlsian example of the guy who just wants to know how many blades of grass there are, and so he just sits around and counting them. Like, is that? And then you can think of other knowledge, like, understanding the theory of relativity or something like that. So I guess, would you want to say, it's maybe a little harder in terms of something like friendship, but you could imagine certain friendships being deeper and kind of more noble, better sorts of friendships than others. So maybe there's even a hierarchy there. I guess that's my first question, I guess. Like, do you think there's hierarchies within goods?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So then
it seems to me, yeah. Now, so some knowledge is higher than other knowledge.
Okay. And then if the goods are incommensurable, though, like, do you have a problem with, so if you can rank within a particular good, like knowledge, there's a hierarchy, there's a ranking. But like, what about if I want to weigh, if the goods are incommensurable, what if I've got like something low on the hierarchy of knowledge and something high on the hierarchy of friendship or something? To what degree does that incommensurability hurt the ability to rank like goods that are in different places on the hierarchy and the independent goods? And then are you kind of running afoul of incommensurability at that point?
Well, I guess the incommensurability, I mean, there's different types of commensurability, different types of incommensurability. I was referring to incommensurability among the intrinsic goods or categories of goods. So I don't think knowledge as such is higher, more excellent in terms of rational desirability, in terms of in terms of what makes it rationally desirable, than say life and health or skillful performance. I think the kind of thing your kind of question you're talking about is where another type of incommensurability, which I think also happens when we're talking about concrete options for choice. So I think when there is a free choice, then I think the options for choice are incommensurable, or at least the live options for choice are incommensurable. But that's a different kind of incommensurability than I was referring to, because am I? And so that one, I think the basis for saying that those options for choice, at least when they're free, when they're both live options, I think, is because otherwise I think they wouldn't be live. If one option offered everything that the other one did plus more, then there wouldn't be, I couldn't choose the lesser one. Of course, there can be options for choice that are commensurable, but then I think they just drop out and they're not all, the inferior ones are no longer live options, I think. But so, I mean, that leaves a lot of room for there of different kinds of commensurabilities. So you can, and going back to this example of, say, like knowledge, different instances of knowledge, you could measure and they say, well, this knowledge is better with respect to this. If you take this as a criterion, then this knowledge is better than that. If you take something else, Aquinas does this kind of thing constantly in his writings. He's saying, well, one virtue is greater than another with respect, and he's got some criterion and standard in there. And then sometimes it makes sense. Well, that's really the criteria, that's really the criterion or the covering value you should look at there. Sometimes it's not so clear. He says, well, the intellect is higher because it's than the will because it's more abstract. Whereas a lot of people might go the other direction. But so I was talking about a very limited incommensurability, and where I was going with that was I wanted to say that we really do have a problem, because I think we do have these sort of various intrinsic goods, and there are different ways of sort of organizing your life, and I want to retain those ways of organizing our life. But then at the same time, it does seem to be a fair question to say, well, look, if you've got all these several incommensurable goods, shouldn't there be some unity in the life? And that's what I was trying, that was one of the things I was trying to get at, to say, yes, there should be an overarching unity in our life, and yet these goods still remain, each of them incommensurably and intrinsically good.
But so I guess, and I'll give up the floor in a second. So I take it you want to say, like, if I've got a choice between a good of knowledge and a good of like friendship, it's not the case that I can pick one or the other. Like, this one is higher in virtue of it being knowledge. Right. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah. I think right. That would not be. Right.
Yeah. So I guess I still worry though that you still have, if there's hierarchies within them, there's still going to be like higher and lower goods, and so they're going to be like prioritized or hierarchy. There's going to be some sort of hierarchy. Like the fact that it's this type of good instead of that type of good doesn't give you a reason, but there's nevertheless this hierarchy of different goods. Like, so there is like sort of a right way to go.
Yeah, I think
they're tied. Like the most loving kind of friendship I have and theory of relativity might be like equally good, and the fact that one is on this list and one is the other isn't a reason, but there's still, maybe there's only like ties in that sense, and then the rest of the time it's going to be a definitive answer about which one to pursue.
Yeah, I mean you could. I think if you've got a significant sort of participation in one type of good and a significant participation in another type of good, I don't see how you could measure those against one another. It seems to me it's always possible to choose though. If that's the only thing at stake, then it would be possible to choose one or the other. I mean, you could have something a very, very negligible participation in one good versus a very substantial participation in another good. I think then you might get to the point where they would be commensurable. I think if we're talking about an option for choice, if they are commensurable, then the lesser one just simply drops out of consideration.
Thanks.
Hi, Pat. Thanks for the talk. I'm just trying to get a sense of the view overall here. So maybe can you try to explain the motivation to diverge your view from the Aristotelian Thomistic view? Because it seems like you're happy to accept an overarching goal, but you don't want an ultimate end. And I guess I don't really know what the difference between those two things are or is. I mean, I guess I would think of maybe your view and Grisez's view as saying, well, the ultimate end is not eudaimonia, as Aristotle thought, or the beatific vision, as Thomas thought, but it's this other thing that's natural. But that still seems like a qualification of the Aristotelian view rather than saying, no, there is no ultimate end after all.
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't contrast the position I hold with the Aristotelian Thomistic view. I think it's when you look at Aquinas' position on the ultimate end on beatitude, he has the essence of beatitude, which he says is the contemplation of the divine essence, but then that is really supernatural. Although we have a sort of we have a natural desire for knowledge and sort of in a way a natural orientation for goodness in general, but even his position, he has he qualifies that. He doesn't locate perfect beatitude. He says the essence of it is in, it doesn't locate perfect beatitude just unqualifiedly in the intellectual, in the fulfillment of the intellect in relationship to God. He also says there's a sort of, he says that there's the bene esse of beatitude, or the fullness of, or the well-being of beatitude, which will include also the goodness of the, the health of the body and friends and all that. That's in the in the well-being of beatitude, and I think that would be closer to what I think what I'm saying and what Grisez says, and in the idea of the kingdom of God, including both a direct union with God, that would be the beatific vision, and the natural fulfillment. So I think you gotta, in other words, I think if you're going to work with Aquinas on this and the perfect beatitude, you need to, I think you need to make it clear how that is going to include all of these intrinsic goods, all of the basic goods. So it's sort of part of the what I was trying to do here is sort of make a place for natural human fulfillment, or the fulfillment of the other, the various aspects of the human being in the complete, in perfect beatitude. That would be the, so now the ultimate, in terms of overarching end and ultimate end, I think ultimate end in the strict sense of ultimate end is one that is an end that is not where you view some object or some condition as good in itself, not just because it brings you something else ulterior to it.
Why isn't that just? I would just think of that as an intrinsic good rather than an ultimate good or ultimate end.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's ultimate in the sense that it's by itself sufficient to motivate you. I think so.
Yeah.
So I think there are. I think where Aquinas says there's only one really truly ultimate end, I think he's saying in the sense of a complete end. And so I'm distinguishing between complete and ultimate. I say the ultimate end is, I mean, part of why he's saying that is because I think he's supposing, which this is a point on which I disagree with St. Thomas on, at least as far as at least so far, he hasn't convinced me, that he thinks whenever I make a choice, that the ultimate end of that is also viewed as complete, or as as the ideal, and I don't see that. So if you take that, if you make that move, then you can agree with St. Thomas that what he's calling the ultimate and complete end will include many constituents that are intrinsically good, but I would call that, the sort of the in a way the complete end, but I would say that it is composed of many ultimate ends, unified under a sort of unified in some way.
Okay.
I think there is I think there are many ultimate ends, and I also think there's only one kind of chief complete ultimate end. And the only point on which I'm really disagreeing with St. Thomas on is I think there can be an ultimate end that's not viewed as complete. And so
Okay.
that's why that's in that question. It's question 1, Article 5, where he argues there is only one true ultimate end, but he supposes that it has to be complete, and that's what I'm not convinced of.
Okay, maybe if I just make one quick comment before David
Yes,
goes.
sure.
So you don't want to. So you think of it more as being consistent with Thomism than trying to contrast your view.
Mhm.
But I mean, it just seems like the beginning of the paper about Aristotle, you do want to contrast with Aristotle, but it seems like you just have a different, like Aristotle doesn't think of an ultimate end as just something that we want for its own sake and not for the sake of anything else. But I think he means it in the sense of complete, that what you're calling complete, in which case you wouldn't need that stuff about, well, if we view these things as having some relation to a further good, then they're somehow second class status, or they're inferior in a certain way. I guess I just.
Yeah. No, I think viewing them as viewing the intrinsic goods as parts of a larger whole doesn't necessarily put them in a secondary status. I mean, I think we need to view them that way, or we should view them that way. But
Okay.
and that part of Aristotle, I don't disagree with. Where I disagree with Aristotle, at least the way I understand him, is in the book 10, where he seems to say that the perfection of the intellectual part of us is in itself higher than the rest. And then even at that point in book 10, I think he's still saying that to get the in a way it's kind of like Aquinas' bene essay of beatitude. I think he's saying you still need to have these other things. You need to have health. You even need to have external goods and fortune and some good looks and so forth. But my disagreement with Aristotle, I guess, was with it's this world, which is actually, I don't know, it's the this worldliness there, and which I guess is not so much his fault there, but I guess when you read Aristotle, at least seems to me, and especially that part where he's talking about, okay, well, you need to have, some good fortune, you need to have some wealth, you need to have good looks, and some good looks and so forth. It seems to me that, and he even says if your children are if you have bad children, that's going to ruin your life. So you really don't, in order to have the good life, eudaimonia, you have to have all these things. And it just struck me there that. Maybe I'm being unfair to Aristotle, but it struck me there that if you're looking at it from an Aristotelian standpoint, and you look at like St. Paul or St. Teresa of Calcutta or even Jesus, that you're not gonna be able to say, oh yeah, that's a good life. But I think we want to be able to say that's really, those people really do, really led good lives, even in this part.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
That's where I think, okay, well then, the ultimate natural end, I think, is cooperating with God. The ultimate natural end isn't this thing that Aristotle. Now, maybe I'm putting too much of a contrast there. Maybe there's a way of modifying Aristotle to kind of to make him fit in with this more than what I've done.
I just thought that you were trying to say that the structure of your view was different, but maybe that's not right.
The what?
The structure of your view, where you have these, intrinsic goods and then sort of an overarching or complete good. That sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
But anyway, I should stop and go ahead, David.
Yeah, I thought that, I guess I had in mind a kind of a Thomist, Aristotelian Thomist, not the only Aristotelian Thomistic view, but a kind of Aristotelian Thomist view that might say to me that, look, you really don't have a problem about talking about the relationship between the intrinsic goods, and that's because those intrinsic goods are just really proximate goods. And I guess that's really more that's using Aristotle, not so much Aristotle himself. Thank you.
David's next, and then Harvey. I'm sorry, then Steve, then Harvey.
My question was a lot like Jim, so I'll use that as an excuse to ask two questions then. A lot of times when people say these goods are incommensurable, they still sort of mean like they're equally good, as opposed to like really incommensurable. You can't even say they're equally good. And then once you do what you recognize what Jim was pointing out, that deeper knowledge is better than superficial knowledge, deeper love is better than, a less deep relationship and friendship. Then you have a way to choose between these goods. Better to pursue a deep friendship than just superficial knowledge. And I wonder if this is what we do all the time anyway. Like if in a bioethical setting, if you let someone die, you might say, well, if he loses on the good of life, we're not going to use these extraordinary measures. But that's because he wasn't getting much out of these other goods. He was not able to participate to much of an extent in friendship, play, career. And the second thing, so one, I want to know, do you mean by incommensurable, they're equally good or not even that? And can we choose if they're equally good, and then we have degrees of goodness within these distinct goods, why we couldn't compare it? And the second question was, are there going to be a lot of moral dilemmas or none at all if there are incommensurable goods? I mean, anytime we pursue one, it comes at the expense of another. Is that we're always going to be doing something we're always in a moral dilemma, or is it impossible to have moral dilemmas because we can never have two goods that we can compare like this? That made sense.
Well, I think incommensurable would be that they're not equal, neither equal nor they're not. There's not just one scale that you can measure them by. But I mean, I don't think when we make a choice between A and B, if it's a free choice or anything that we really have to hesitate about, I don't think it's because we're saying, well, this one has everything, that the other one doesn't have plus more. I think we're sort of adopting that there are different ways of measuring the options for choice against one another, and we're in a way adopting one kind of measure rather than another. In other words, I think we have to like if you're saying, well, we could should I if I make a choice to withhold this treatment or to forego this treatment to preserve my life, it's not I don't think it's because I think, well, my life is just I don't think it's because I'm measuring the life and saying that, well, this life has just less goodness in it than what I can do with that with that time in the meantime, or with resources for somebody else. I don't think that's what's going on. I think I'm saying that maybe it's not fair for me to do that, or it's it's really these goods are worth pursuing, and that maybe say, like, if I say, well, I'm not going to use this chemotherapy to extend my life because this is tremendously expensive, and it's going to maybe extend my life for a while, but I'm not going to be able to participate in various. It doesn't get to I still think the very fact that I am hesitating about the choice means that there's still something in the one option that's not offered by the other option. And that, so I do have to make a choice. It's not just sort of determined by my list and say, well, this one adds up to 5 points of goodness and the other one only added up to 3 points of goodness. I don't know if that's a help, but I think what we think of as in saying that it's the amount of good, it's not so much the sheer amount of goodness in this option versus that one, but I've already selected some standard, and by that standard I've selected, it's one is excelling the other one. That makes sense. In other words, I think a lot of times what we have is they're incommensurable. I mean, they are commensurable in various ways, but I have to select which standard I'm going to use.
Mhm. What happens to moral dilemmas? Are there none, or how would you describe them?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure. What do you mean by a moral dilemma? Where usually
It's sort of like you're going to do something wrong either if you choose.
Right. I don't think. I don't think there are any moral dilemmas. I mean, I think that. Okay. I think it's. I'm always in a situation where I'm going to be able. I think I don't think I'm in a situation where whichever option I have, it's going to be just going to be wrong.
Right. Maybe I was reading incommensurability as equally good, and so then everything's a moral dilemma. And then on the other hand, I was worried there would never be any, but you're all right with that. I mean,
well, I mean, if you have, in other words, if you had two options that were exactly equal, let's say they're not they're not incommensurable, but they're equal, then I don't see why it would be wrong to choose either one. I'm not sure what maybe I'm missing something here.
Right. Well, I mean, I could do something for my colleagues. I could do something for my family or my friends. These are all goods. Yeah. And there's no way to rank them. I mean, could you appeal to, given your life and your narrative unity, there's reasons to do one rather than the other. You would allow that, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think there is a. I mean, there's my position is that you do, in a way, the moral standards are ways of ranking choices. So I say that, okay, I ought to choose X. I ought not to choose to kill this person. I ought to choose to maybe even to allow something very bad to happen to me rather than intentionally kill this person. But that's not because I think there's just going to be sheer more good produced by my not killing them than killing them. It's because I think that my will be related, or it would not be respectful of his good or of all the various goods to choose to kill him. So
I didn't have that type of case in mind. I had choosing between two goods.
Choosing between two goods. Well, yeah. I mean, the other norms I think come into play. Am I letting my emotion? Am I letting my partiality, feelings of partiality, or determine what I choose, or am I just letting sheer fear or something like that? So I think there are other norms, but I could even come down to two choices where both of them are morally good, and I might not be able to conclude which one is the morally preferable one. And if I can't, then I think it would be permissible for me to choose either one.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I don't know. Yeah. I'm not getting the link between. I don't see how the incommensurability of either the basic goods or the incommensurability of the uh, goods and bads in the options for choice is going to lead to moral dilemmas. I'm not catching that.
Yeah, I just thought there was some good you were not pursuing, and thus, in a sense, you could be wronging if these were equally good or not comparable when you pursued the family over the friends or vice versa. I was wondering if that's going to always mean we're in a moral dilemma, or will never be in moral dilemmas unless they're two of the same, two promises, the same, like that. Because we don't have a criteria for choice, or we don't have a common criteria. We have to appeal to something else, like, well,
I think,
you should practice this more than study physics. Michael Jordan should be shooting foul shots, not studying physics. Even though they're both good, just given the way his life has gone, it's reasonable for him to pursue that good rather than this other good when he can't do both.
Yeah, I think that a lot of that is, I just don't see how whether the goods are incommensurable or commensurable. I don't see how that's gonna get you out of that.
Right now, I'm asking for how are we going to choose in these cases with incommensurable goods? And one thing is you look at someone's life. You have a large family or no family, then it's, you're an athlete or you're not athlete, then there's reasons to pursue one of these incommensurable goods over the others. Fits better in narrative, for want of a better word.
Well, I think we should choose in a way that's respectful of all the basic goods, and then it's going to be that's I think the basic moral norm. Then you can get more specific norms that are going to come in determining, given all sorts of other realities that become to make it more specific. But in other words, if there were, if you thought that there were that the goods could be commensurated, I don't think that would be an answer to those situations. I don't think, for example, you say, well, okay, I have this, should I spend the day with, should I spend the next couple hours with my friends, or should I spend the next couple hours with my family? Well, you might say something like, well, look, family is a higher good than friends, but it doesn't follow from that. I mean, no one wants to say that, well, I should always spend the time with my family rather than my friends. I just don't see how.
Right, of course.
So I think the way we actually do it is we have to talk, we bring in these other commitments and our specific talents and so forth. And then I think we have I think we do have some moral absolutes grounded on those intrinsic goods.
Let's go on to Harvey or Steve.
Actually, so Bob had a quick follow-up question related to David's.
Yeah, I was just gonna try to help. I think that the way in which the incommensurability gets moral dilemmas is, so it seemed like your response to choosing between two rights, like say friendship and knowledge or something. It seemed like your response was like, well, they're just both right, so there's not a moral dilemma where you're always going to do something wrong, right? Because they're both right. So I think the thought is, just imagine choosing between two wrongs. So a situation in which you only can choose between two things that are wrong. And if you have incommensurable goods, it seems plausible that you might have incommensurable bads. And so you're not going to be able to say either is worse. So either one that you choose, if your only choice is between two bads, then any choice between two bads on your view is going to be a moral dilemma. You maybe don't get as big of an explosion as I think David was suggesting, but one way to make the explosion a little bigger is you can't say that they're both right, because at least not in the sense that this is right sort of vis-a-vis the choice, right, more right than this, or something like, or right as compared to have chosen that. because they're incommensurable. So maybe the thought is think like Rossian, right? Like you choose one and it is right, but it's also wrong not to choose the other one that you had an option. So you get like a hanging wrong. So it's the choice is both right and wrong. Either way you go, because they're incommensurable as well. So I don't know if that helps press the problem a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, it says, well, you're when you say I'm in a situation where whichever choice I make is going to be wrong, that's what I deny. I mean, I think we have some, I think, intrinsic goods, and a choice to destroy or to diminish one of these goods is in itself wrong. But I don't think you're ever in a situation where you have, the only option open to you is to choose to destroy or diminish an intrinsic good. You can always choose to do nothing, and of course, sometimes choosing to do nothing would be wrong. But I don't think you're going to get into a situation where, okay, if I choose, if I've only got two choices, either to destroy this good or to do nothing, and then doing nothing would be wrong. If the only other option for me it involves choosing to destroy or diminish a good, then in that case, I think choosing not to do anything would be the option to go. In other words, I just don't think we get into a situation where whichever way we do, the only possible choice is there's something inherently wrong in them. That would exactly. Part of it is, I think, that I think what the sort of moral absolutes, I think, are based on either the choice is directly contrary to an intrinsic good, or it's a choice that by its nature is unduly neglectful of a base of an intrinsic good, or complete disregard of that. But I think we never get into a situation in which those are the only two. The only options I have are going to involve either, are going to involve either destruction or an undue neglect of a good. If, for example, the only way I could save my life, or the only way I could save even the life of someone I love, is by torturing someone or killing an innocent person, or something, then I think I ought not to do that which would save them.
But what if it's just a lesser harm? I've got a bomb, it's going to go off. These people die. I can get out of here by running over this guy and minor harm, run over this guy, minor harm. I mean, I'm going to be harming people in trying to save some people. So the silly philosophy example, I have a bomb strapped to me. I got to get away from the other people. And the only way to get away, save these lives is I'm either going to have to do a minor harm to third guy over here or a fourth guy over here. I mean, on your view, isn't that still, I'm going against a wrong where I run over a guy and cause him a minor injury while saving other people, and I don't have the option of doing nothing because then people are going to die.
It's a variant of the track. We've gone from trolleys to bombs.
Yeah. Well, I just want to give you an example where I can't do nothing, and I'm not torturing or killing people, but I am causing minor harm.
So I had the bombs. So I had the bombs. I think I saw this movie last week. So I have this. So I have the bombs are taped around me, or
yeah, something like that.
And here I am. I'm next to 5 people, and I could jump over the tracks, or no, I could move over to the other side of the room, where there's only one person. Is that it? Something like that.
Well, I'm not going to
the trolley.
I just want to see, are you really committed to never doing harm to bring about good? If it's a minor harm, I mean, I'm going to bruise somebody to keep someone else from dying. Surely I can do that.
Well, I mean, I think this is like as I understand your scenario, it's like the trolley problem. I think if I have the bomb strapped to me and I run out of the room into the room where there's one person, I don't think I'm intentionally killing the one person. I think his death is a side effect of what I do. I run out of the room to save the 5, and so that's why I run out of the room. And so running out of the room means,
trying to make it the case where you got to really run over somebody, and you know that's constitutive of minor injury. I think I'm going against a good, his health. This isn't the case of, where you torture, kill innocents, but I'm harming an innocent for good, and it's a minor harm. Is that really, I'm never going to go against an evil? And anyway, I'm co-opting.
I don't think I should ever harm someone as a means, harm an innocent person as actually I don't even, capital punishment's another issue, but I
right.
I even think I think capital punishment's wrong too, but that's another one. But I don't think I should intentionally harm at least an innocent.
Even a trivial physical harm,
Trivial.
Yeah.
Well, if it's completely negligible, yeah, I think that's fine. But I think the intentionally harming an intrinsic good of a person, whether myself or another, as a means of helping someone else, I think is always wrong.
Yeah.
So I would say, okay, if I'm in a car and the only way to save the 5 people in the car is to back up, but the only way to back up is I run over the people who are lying beneath my car, I would say that running over those people is I'm running over them, but I'm not harming them intentionally, because they're being harmed is not what helps me. I think it's like the trolley car again, trolley. I guess not a car.
I should shut up. I bet Steve's going to do some twist on this.
There was something like this with you had the soldiers trying to get away from this is like this back in the I don't know 15th 16th century kind of writing, where so they have the soldiers, they're trying to escape, but the other side has the hostages lying over the bridge, and they're on the horse, and so when they gallop over the bridge, they're going to be trampling over these hostages. And the question was, can they do that? And I think the answer is yes, they could do that. The deaths of the hostages would not be a means. I think it would be a side effect.
Yeah. But I couldn't, if you say, I will save these lives if you twist that guy's arm and cause him some discomfort.
Discomfort, yeah, that's fine. If the only way to save the guy, let's say the only way to save these people is by chopping off this guy's fingers, then I think I should not do it.
Yeah, so even a lesser than that, just the really hard.
I mean, it's got to be a real harm. But I think slapping him in the face, I think you could cause him pain.
Mm-hmm.
But I think actual mutilation or actual harm, I think is him.
Okay.
I don't think pain is I don't think pain is a privation of an intrinsic good.
So
I think you can cause a pain.
So we're coming close to the time, and we've got Steve and Harvey. So Steve, did you want to go again, or did you want to give Harvey priority?
I want to go again, but I'll go after Harvey because I've already gone once. So
okay.
If there's time left, I would like to get on my last question, but I'll go after Harvey. Thank you.
Okay,
Harvey,
Pat.
Harvey, what's your name? What's your last?
My name is not iPad. It is. I have this new iPad, and I just don't know how to get my name on it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's Harvey, and I remember meeting you several years ago at an early Romanel.
Okay, good.
I will first acknowledge a weakness of what I'm about to ask. Is my view of God is solely he looks like my maternal grandfather, who at the age of 90 even had a couple of eye teeth left. Mm-hmm. And my view of the organization of the universe is really based on John Milton, heaven's up there, hell is down there, and it's filled with a lot of debauchery and women. But I'd like to ask you something about God being perfect and providential. There's a tradition in Judaism, possibly discussed in Maimonides, the Mishnah, where if God is perfect, and let me start over. I'd like to ask you about faith. And if God is perfect, why would he subject Abraham to the moral dilemma, which you say doesn't exist, of sacrificing his son, causing him to violate one of the commandments? And so it seems to me that if you want to believe in God and you want to believe that God is perfect and providential, there's no justification necessary. It's simply a matter of faith. And rabbis I've spoken to, and possibly even priests at the Newman Center believe this, that it's really, you can talk about Big Bang theories, the universe coming this way. What happens if we find Martians living on Mars that weren't created by God? It simply doesn't matter. It's simply all faith. And I'm curious as to how you view the role of faith in natural law and God's perfection. Long way to go. Okay.
There's a lot in there. The Abraham thing, when you say there's no justification needed, did you mean no justification needed for Abraham's choice, or you mean no justification needed for belief in God?
No justification. God is supposedly testing Abraham's faith.
Yes.
And was there a justification of, would a good God force, a God of goodness, force an adherent to demonstrate his faith? And well, I'll leave it at that. So it's really, Abraham had faith, but he trusted God. And was it a good thing? I don't know. What was the effect on Isaac?
Yeah, I don't have a, I mean, I'm sort of flummoxed on that Abraham Isaac thing. I think from the standpoint of Abraham, I think he was promised that he would have descendants as numerous as the grains of sand and the stars in the sea, and yet he is asked by God to sacrifice his son. So I think he was doing what he was doing what he was commanded to do, but knowing by faith that somehow or another his son would still be alive. And so I think he was carrying out what God commanded, but not understanding exactly what God had in mind. So I mean, it seems to me that's the meaning of that passage. And I don't think he was intended to do whatever it is that God, I don't think he was intending the death of his son. I think he was intended to do whatever God was commanded him to do, and knew that God knew by faith that God would make sure this would work, but wasn't sure, but didn't understand how that would be. But that's the, I don't have a good answer for that. The Abraham thing.
I have a problem with God having to be perfect. It would seem that he would have to be perfect to be believed in, because if he wasn't, why would you want to believe in a fallible entity? So it would seem to me that belief trumps reason in this case.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, belief, faith trumps reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think that's right. And I think overall, I think faith is reasonable, and it's more reasonable to have faith than not. And I don't think we can necessarily answer all the questions that are posed to us, which doesn't mean that, okay, then that shows that I have to change my, I have to change my mind on that.
Well, let me just say, I'm glad to see you again. I remember you from years ago, and you seem to be getting younger, unless you've got the Zoom fix going on. And you've given me something to think about. So I'm really glad to have
Harvey,
heard
what's your last name? You look very familiar, too. What's your last name again?
Harvey Berman.
Berman, yes. Okay, yeah. All right, gotcha.
And you've given me something to think about, and you've lasted for over 2 hours. So you really are close to being perfect.
We did have a bathroom break in there, so fortunately.
Well, let's sneak Steve in, and he'll have the last question, and I can just ask, in our hangout time.
Okay, you sure, Jonathan?
Go for it.
Okay. All right. So my question is, you said that our overarching purpose for human beings is to live according to God's plan. And you said that God's plan has an independent reason. It's different from our intrinsic goals that we should be pursuing. There's a separate reason that God adds. And my question is, could you give us some indication of what that separate reason is, or is it something we know not what? Because any reason I can think of seems to refer to an intrinsically valuable goal. And I'm worried that if you can't tell us what God's independent reason is, this undercuts our reason to think that God provides an independent reason. That is, in short, when we look at God's plan, which is independent of our intrinsic goals, how does God provide a reason that doesn't involve him arbitrarily creating one?
Well, okay. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I don't say about God's purpose in creating is that, of course, this goes back to the perfection business. I think you have to say that if you reason that there is a first cause for the existence of the universe, then I think it has to have existence of itself. If it has existence through itself, then I think you can say it. Then it can't lack anything that belongs to any possible perfection, because if it has existence of itself, then in a way, existence is what it is. If existence is what it is, then it has the whatever perfection belongs to existence. So I think So I think it doesn't lack anything. That doesn't tell us what God is. It just says that the first cause is such that it's not the case that it lacks anything. If that's true, if the first cause doesn't lack anything, then the motive for causing other things to be is not to fulfill some lack of his. And so then it has to be, then it's going to be something along the lines of generosity. So that's the rationale, sort of from the standpoint of natural reason, for saying that God's plan, that given that he has a plan, if he's perfect, then he's intelligent. If he's intelligent, then he has a plan. Then the plan isn't sort of getting something out of himself, so it's in some ways communicating to us some degree of sharing in his perfection. Now, that's as far as, if that's correct, if that's plausible, or I mean, if that's reasonable, if that's correct and reasonable, then that's as far as you can get by natural reason. I think. I don't think we can say what God's plan is, but that he has some plan, and the plan doesn't involve his own perfection, doesn't involve attaining his own perfection, but involves, in a way, communicating some perfection to others. That's as far as you can get philosophically. Now, then I think the idea that there's a community of that the community is sharing in a way, divine grace, divine life itself, and all of these other goods. And that I think is that's what faith adds, or that's part of what faith adds.
But sorry, and then I'll stop. I find this view strange, in that you think our overarching goal is to fulfill God's plan, and yet we don't know what God's plan is. So it's kind of an odd system whereby we have this overarching goal and then we don't know what it is. In fact, I claim that's strange enough to be implausible. I like to talk, don't get me wrong, but I think that the core claim is sort of, is borderline incoherent.
Well,
No offense.
yeah, I think it's analogous to you're in a family and dad has a plan. You're not exactly you're not exactly sure what the plan is. But then of course, then I think he can tell you what the plan is a little more. So I think by faith there's more content about what the plan is. So what I was saying was that I think we can infer by natural reason that there is a plan, and that it involves a community, and it involves our natural fulfillment. But what that further involves, the details of that plan, I don't think we can get by natural reason. So it's not simply utterly blank. God has a plan, and I don't know what the heck it is. There are some components in it, but the details of it, I think we don't know except by faith.
And just to be, and I'll stop. That's Thomistic. That the overarching goal, that's our central goal, we discover through faith and not natural reason. That's consistent with Thomism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it is. Yeah.
Enjoy the talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yeah, thank you.
Well, it is 10 after, and so let's thank our speaker. And I'm going to stop the recording here and